Okay, good evening, everyone. Start with the traditional homage to the Triple Gem. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So welcome to another Wednesday evening installment of the Clear Mountain Monastery YouTube channel Dhamma Talks and Investigations. This evening we'll continue with the final installment of the different intelligences, the multiple intelligences which the Buddha spoke about in the Anguttara Nikaya, book number 7, sutta number 64. And the specific type of intelligence, the seventh of the seven, which we'll be discussing in Pali, is called Pugala Paro Paranyu. And this can be translated as interpersonal intelligence, or basically having a good sense of the distinctions among people. And we'll flush out more exactly what that means. So just to give a bit of an overview of what this evening will look like. So we'll have a bit of Dhamma talk going into this particular aspect, this particular intelligence, which the Buddha praised as being supportive of Dhamma growth. Talk on that for about half an hour, and then we'll open it up to questions, and people can feel free to type in questions at any point during the talk. And yeah, we'll address those for another 15 minutes. And then after that, from 6:45 to 7:30, we'll switch over to Zoom. There's a link on the Clear Mountain Monastery website, and people can jump over there for a more interactive verbal exchange and more Dhamma fun. So that's the overview. So this knowledge of knowing distinctions among individuals, it's the seventh of the multiple intelligences. These intelligences, just to recap, are Dhammanyu, knowledge of the Dhamma, or Dhammic intelligence. We have Atanyu, which is intuitive intelligence. Atanyu, which is intrapersonal intelligence, or knowledge of oneself, knowing thyself. Then there's Matanyu, quantitative intelligence, knowing the measure of food, clothing, etc., which is right for increase in wholesome qualities. Then you have Kalanyu, which is knowing the time, temporal intelligence, knowing when to do what. Parisanyu, which is social intelligence, knowing how to behave in different groups, knowing how to relate to different social settings. And then this final one, interpersonal intelligence. As we'll see, what this knowledge is pointing to is perhaps just being a good judge of character. And the sutta expounds on what this actually means in a Buddhist context, what a good character is, and what it means to know and be a good judge of good character. Another way we could label this intelligence is evaluative intelligence, social differentiation, capacity to know spiritual distinctions, astute intelligence, social astuteness, or social shrewdness. Why is this important? It's important because the people around us really shape our lives in many ways. And the Buddha did talk about inclining towards people who help and nurture your spiritual practice, and really inclining away from people who are unsupportive, and who, when you interact with them and you are hanging out with them and spending time with them and listening to them, you might be tacitly, you might be unconsciously taking on their views and their ideas, which, if it's someone who has ideas which are not in line with the Buddhist teachings, maybe which go against the Four Noble Truths, people who are really positing a self onto everything, you might want to incline away from such strong views and the people who express them. I'll read the excerpt. So for people who've been following along, and if you haven't been following along, it's very easy. Underneath the video here, there should be a link to the discourse, and you can just follow along. This is at the bottom. This is the last of the intelligences. And it's the longest. It's the elaboration of this is the longest of any of the other descriptions of these intelligences. So how is a bhikkhu, how is a practitioner? One who knows the superior and inferior kinds of persons. Here, a practitioner understands persons in terms of pairs. Two persons. One who wants to see the noble ones, and one who does not want to see the noble ones. The person who does not want to see the noble ones is in that respect blameworthy. The person who wants to see the noble ones is in that respect praiseworthy. So already there's quite a lot there. At the outset, you'll notice this talk of superior and inferior kinds of persons. And this, from a Western framework, this seems discriminatory. The language seems discriminatory, but it's always useful in context of when the Buddha speaks about people, is that he also speaks about not self. So although conventionally speaking, you can talk about Ajahn Kovilo or Tan Nisabho or Lumpur Pasano or Sally or Joan or whoever. These are names, these are all conditions which have come to manifest. And all of us have our own tendencies. And in different respects, there are, if one takes a Dhammic framework, which posits a goal. So if you have a goal, then that introduces this quality of inferior or superior or helpful or unhelpful in attaining that goal. So when it says one knows superior and inferior kinds of persons, what that is pointing to is one is able to recognize, as the rest of this discourse really elaborates upon, one's able to recognize helpful and unhelpful general qualities and tendencies of people as they relate to growth in Dhamma or decay in Dhamma. It's not a common idiom, but so another thing we'll notice with this first quality, we're noticing distinctions between two types of people. And again, these are general qualities, general trends. So you can say one river is generally more fast moving than another river. Again, the water, it can be the same water, the same chemical elements, but one just has a tendency based on conditions, based on altitude or the length where you're measuring at. They have different speeds of water. So in that sense too, you can measure people, even though we're really just a continuous flow of conditions. So the first distinction, the first pair, is someone who, on the one hand, wants to see, quote, noble ones, and then people who don't want to see noble ones. So that is also interesting. So what does it mean? What is a noble one, basically? The Pali word is Arya. So they're the people who want to see the Aryans and the people who have no interest in seeing the Aryans. And yeah, this is somewhat of a faith-based proposition. I would venture to say this is almost certainly true, is that one, most Americans have no idea what an Aryan is, what a noble person is, and two, would not really be inclined, since they have no idea what they are, to associate with such a person. So for people who are maybe new to this type of terminology, Arya is the name for someone who is noble in the sense that they have put down various different mental, unbeautiful mental qualities. They've totally, in terms of an arahant, a fully enlightened person, they've put aside all greed, anger, and delusion. There's no longer any manifestation of any covetousness or unwholesome desire or anger or hatred or ill will or just the kind of dullness that most of us manifest and exhibit most of the time. So this is an object of faith. Does that exist? Are there people who have no greed, anger, and delusion? Or there are 4 stages of noble ones in a Theravada Buddhist context. And with each stage, there are different qualities which the noble person has fully cut off. Yeah, there's no more of these qualities with each successive stage. So even at the most beginning stage of these noble ones, the Aryas, a Sotapanna, a stream enter, they have fully cut off all doubt. They no longer are attached to rites and rituals. And they no longer believe that this body and this identity is a self. So they're totally undiluted all the time, forever, until they pass away. They've attained to that knowledge. So this is a matter of faith. Can you believe that? Do you think that this is possible? And this is important because it really points to the goal of the Buddhist path, in the ultimate goal of the Buddhist path. There are many sub-goals which we try to work towards immediately, and most importantly, being present and aware and awake and attentive and receptive in the present moment. So that's our provisional goal, which is awesome. It's awesome as a goal because it's right now, and that's really important. But in a Theravada Buddhist context, you do have these higher goals. It is possible to abandon all greed, hatred, and delusion. So, but as an object of faith, you can't just will yourself to believe this. Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. There are people who have no greed and anger and delusion. If you've been, just hanging out with normal people, especially normal, well, I don't know about especially, people all over the world are like this, but I've mostly lived in America, and we got lots of greed, anger, delusions, but it's the same all over the world. But so you can't just, and if everyone you've seen for your whole life has exhibited in gross and subtle ways, unhealthy desires and aversions and just torporific states, then it's a leap of faith. Actually, it's a jump of confidence to say, oh yeah, maybe it is possible. So start with wherever you're at, and if you can even muster up, maybe it's possible to abandon these things, then in some sense you can be said to be in the camp of people that believe, those who are desirous to see noble ones. And then you have people who, either don't believe that such a thing, such a being exists in the world, or if they do, maybe they don't want to see them for some reason. If someone's totally wrapped up in their addictions and compulsions and obsessions, and maybe even if they do believe in arhats, they're temporarily blinded and don't actually engage in wanting to see such beings. It's interesting to note that this pairing of distinctions, it's both descriptive and it's prescriptive. So someone who has this interpersonal intelligence, knowing distinctions among beings, who's a good judge of character. Okay, this is the type of person who wants to see noble ones, this isn't, etc. That's the description of the state. There are some people who incline towards this, and there are some other people who incline towards that. But it's also underneath that, it also is prescriptive. Like, you want to be in the type of, you want to associate with the people who do want to see noble ones, because the more you hang out with them, then they might pull you in, like, hey, I'm going to go see person X or whatever, and I'm going to go read some discourses, because these days, it might not be possible. You might not have an arhat in your neighborhood that you can go see easily, but Dhamma talks online, not saying this one, but you've got audio of Ajahn Chah, of Longta Mahabua, people who are purportedly to have been arhats within the last 2 centuries, within the last century. You've got podcasts of great teachers who are inclining in this direction. You've got translations of the discourses, which are next to actually being able to see a noble being with your eyes. So this is the type of person you want to hang out with. And one other final thing, until we go to the next pair of people that we're seeing distinctions among, is just this: the people who want to see noble ones are blameworthy in that respect, or the ones who want to see them are praiseworthy in that respect, and those who don't are blameworthy in that respect. So again, this is very skillful language on the part of the Buddha. He's not saying that person's totally bad. They don't want to see arhats, so they're just totally dumb and they've got no redeeming quality. So in that aspect, they're blameworthy. Blameworthy in what sense? Blameworthy in the sense that if you want to be growing on this path, and then this is not the type of person who you want to hang out with on the blameworthy end. So in that respect, they might have other good qualities, and hanging out with them, associating with them, reading their books, watching their podcasts, watching their movies, whatever. You might be able to get something else out of it. So it's just in one respect, in this respect, they're blameworthy in a Dhammic context. So to the next quality. So 2 further persons, which the person of interpersonal intelligence, or the person who knows distinctions, the person who is savvy and is able to have this social shrewdness and astuteness. There are 2 persons who want to see the noble ones, one who wants to hear the good Dhamma and one who does not want to hear the good Dhamma. And of those 2, the one who does want to hear the good Dhamma is praiseworthy in that respect, and the one who doesn't want to hear the good Dhamma is blameworthy in that respect. So what is the good Dhamma? The Pali word is Sat Dhamma. Sat here can also be translated as true. So this is the true Dhamma. These are teachings. I mean, wherever you get your truth from, and that's it's a bit tricky, because how do you know if you're reading fake news or if your sources are true? You're testing them, like the sources that you've been relying upon, and the sources that you are getting used to. You start reading. So for myself, started reading the Pali Canon and started off with the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the foundations of mindfulness, and say, oh yeah, seems pretty true. Okay, I can take this on. Read another sutta. It's not yet telling me about angels and all sorts of stuff that I was not yet ready to believe, and this type of thing. Okay, I can take that on. And it's just, okay, this seems like a reliable source. And So personally, I've got this faith in the Pali Canon as a very good source of true Dhamma. But that said, there's lots of intelligent and true things which sages and wise people of every nationality and probably every religion have said throughout time. And get your inspiration wherever you can, and in a dialect and a way of speaking which you can identify with and which is inspiring. Next, you have two persons who want to hear the good Dhamma. So one who listens to the Dhamma with eager ears, one who does not listen to the Dhamma with eager ears. So the latter is blameworthy in that respect, and the former is praiseworthy in that respect. So wanting to hear the Dhamma with eager ears. Maybe some of you know this feeling. I mean, I imagine if people are tuning in to hear some monk talk on a Wednesday evening, you're somewhat eager. If you're coming in live, I mean, YouTube, I hope we don't lose, people live, because everybody's got to realize this, but you can watch YouTube videos later. You don't actually have to be live. But then you do miss out on some of the conversation. But yeah, there's an eagerness, which is great. I love it. I have it too, often, a lot of the time, and that's to be praised. And so what we're seeing here with these distinctions, it's like a branching tree diagram. Yeah. So first we have the people who want to see noble ones, those who want to see noble ones, and those who don't want to see noble ones. And then of the ones who want to see noble ones, that further branches, bifurcates into two more people. So the people who want to see them, you have ones who want to hear the Dhamma, who want to hear the good Dhamma, and those who don't want to hear the good Dhamma. And then of the people who do want to hear the good Dhamma, there are those who want to listen with eager ears and those who don't. And again, we're kind of like only tracing one of these branches and sub-branches. But yeah, it's quite an interesting journey. So what's next after of those who want to listen to the Dhamma with eager ears? One, having heard the Dhamma, retains it in mind, and another person, having heard the Dhamma, does not retain it in mind. The former is praiseworthy in that respect, and the latter is blameworthy in that respect. So even if we're eager to hear the Dhamma, it takes an extra step to actually retain it in mind. Most monasteries I've lived at, it's kind of the habit when people are listening to a Dhamma talk. Most people are listening with their eyes closed and maybe nodding, maybe not, and maybe they are very actively intellectually engaged and are trying to memorize the content of the talk. But oftentimes it's not a sure thing. I know for myself, I often find it quite helpful to actually take notes. And I've loved it. There have been a number of places I've lived at. I was living with Ajahn Jayasaro, and it was quite common. So he was giving Dhamma talks for an audience, and it was very common to see people listening and taking notes, myself included. So you'd see lay people who were kind of like on a different level than of the actual room than Ajahn Jayasaro was. And yeah, a bunch of people taking notes. Oh yeah, he said that's a great idea. Write it down. And then I'm on the side, I'm on like the monk side, I'm kind of raised up as well, and I'm kind of taking notes as well. I feel a little bit dorky, but that's how I retain things in mind. And it's important. Like, it's not necessarily the case that just because you hear something and are inspired by it and it's true and you know the truth of it and you're inspired by it in the moment, it's not necessarily the case that you're going to remember that and totally have it embedded in your heart and ready to be acted upon anytime you want, and especially when it's most useful and most needed. So figure out memory systems. I've given talks on this before about how to memorize lists. There's what's called the mind palace. There's all sorts of memory tricks which actually make listening to a Dhamma talk fun. It doesn't have to be this torturous process, which if you're living in a monastery, you are kind of forced to listen to Dhamma talks. And people can start feeling, if you're having to listen to these talks, over and over again, if you're not really engaged, it can really be an unpleasant experience. But if you learn about how to pay attention and how to memorize, then it really changes the whole engagement. You're actually engaged with the process. You're not just, passively receiving all their words, just, being smacked on the face again and again by their comments, but you're actually, engaging. Okay, so they mentioned, there's this, Dhammanyu, it's Dhammic intelligence, and then there's intuitive intelligence, and then there's intrapersonal intelligence and quantitative, temporal, etc. You're actually engaging in remembering things. Another thing, and we'll probably talk about this in maybe a whole nother talk, but it's a huge part of various monks I know lives, is actually a spaced repetition program, SRS. It's basically a way to take notes and then to review those notes, review the insights that you've taken on a scheduled basis so that you don't forget them. And that's a really cool thing. So if you're curious, if your interest is piqued by this, then you can look up SRS and maybe we'll talk about it later. So of those who've heard the Dhamma and retained it in mind, we've got another fork on the positive end. There's one who examines the meaning of the teachings that have been retained, and there's one who does not examine the meaning. And the former is to be praised in that respect, and the latter is to be blameworthy in that respect. So it's not that necessarily the case. This is one problem of memory techniques. Just because you've got it in mind doesn't mean that you've actually examined its meaning and really incorporated it into the way you think, in the way you live, in the way your heart operates and manifests and warms yourself and others. So you actually want to examine the meaning of the teachings. And another fork, and I think this is the final fork, there are two persons, those who have understood the meaning and the Dhamma, and skip the step. So those who examine the meaning, one type of person has understood the meaning and then practices it in accordance with the Dhamma, and then the other person has examined the meaning but doesn't practice accordingly. Okay, so they've memorized it, they've thought about the meaning, examined it, but one person practices and one person doesn't. And the former is praiseworthy and the latter is blameworthy. And the final step is one who is practicing for one's own welfare, but not for the welfare of others. And then there's one who practices both for their own welfare and for the welfare of others. That is fascinating. And the Buddha says here that the person who is practicing for their own welfare, but not for the welfare of others, is blameworthy in that respect. And the person who is practicing for their own welfare and the welfare of others is praiseworthy in that respect. So that's really something to reflect on for any Theravada Buddhist monastics out there, like myself at times, who seem self-contented to just practice for one's own welfare. The Buddha says here that it is praiseworthy to think about others in one's Dhamma practice. So it is in this way that a practitioner understands persons in terms of pairs. It is in this way that a practitioner knows one who is superior and one who is inferior, these different types of persons. So what do you do? I think it's good to, there's a phrase in, I think it's 1984 by Orwell, which is actually called doublethink, which is, in the book, it's a very kind of sinister concept. It's basically being able to think in line with Big Brother and at the same time being able to think for yourself. And it has negative connotations from Big Brother's perspective. But the term is interesting in a Dhammic way, perhaps, is that being able to double think, one, on the level of not self. Yeah, so really, there are no people. we're all just conglomerations of manifesting conditions, and we're all just processes in a sense. But then in the other sense, in the other way of thinking, and we can have these two parallel ways of processing the world, is to actually see distinctions. Yeah. So conventionally speaking, there are different types of people. Yeah. And yeah, perhaps we'll close the formal talk there. We've gone through the whole of this Dhammanyu Sutta, and I've really enjoyed examining these meanings and hearing people's questions and thinking about the implications of these dhammas. So we'll open it up to questions. Okay, it's good to see people tuning in from all over the place. Okay. Here's a question. So, Kovilo, how come monks can't stand in the akimbo posture? Okay, this is a bit unrelated, except you can draw distinctions. Okay, so this is relating it back to how we see distinctions among people. And yeah, seeing distinctions among monks. Again, we're not, and again, when we say that someone is praiseworthy in one respect or blameworthy in another respect, that is not permission to dislike them. Yeah. So the Buddha never praises aversion or anger or hatred. So when we say that one person is blameworthy in a certain respect, we just recognize that and we don't dislike them for it. But yeah, so what akimbo means, the Pali word is kumbhakato. This is one of the monks' 227 training rules. And the Pali word, I think, is cognate with the English word akimbo and kumbhakato. And what the Pali word literally means is making a prop. Yeah, so this is somebody, this is a monk who's like, constantly like, they're like chilling and like, leaning up against the thing behind them, and they're just like constantly falling all over the place. And it's someone who's not really giving much attention into how they're appearing in the world. They're not appearing in kind of an upright way. They're kind of a bit lazy, bodily posture wise, and maybe not just lazy, but sloppy. Of course, everybody's energy goes up and down. I mean, there's no monk who can just constantly sit up straight all the time. But in public, for a monk, we are, we're wearing these robes, and it's almost like a flag, like Buddhism. We're waving it all the time, and how monks act, does have an implication and effects on the way that people see Buddhism as a whole. And if people see like monks, like hanging out in the airport, and they're just like, I'm just like playing on my iPhone and just like leaning up against like the side of the wall, and it's just uninspiring in a sense. And that said, if a monk does that, they are blameworthy in that respect if it's not done mindfully. So I think it is, if someone is mindfully relaxing the body and leaning up against something, I don't think that's what this is pointing to. And again, it is the monk's rule is pointing to something which one does in public. So again, I don't know how many people are interested about the nuances of monk's rules, but yeah, so a number of people talking about ways to stay engaged with Dhamma talk, having a notebook. And yeah, I really love it. I think I saw it for the first time in Thailand. People actually taking notes, but why not? It's it helps one remember things. All right, another question. So how come people can know the truth and even with great effort fail at following the knowledge they know? Is it just really laziness and ignorance? That feels kind of mean to say, but is it accurate? How come people can know the truth and even with great effort fail at following the knowledge they know? Yeah, I think this is just common. It has something to do with that memory and sati. So most people know, if you know any Pali at all, sati is one of the first Pali words that people learn. It means mindfulness. But it is related to the root which means to remember. So there is an aspect of mindfulness which is remembering things. And if one knows something to be true, but can't follow it through, there are a number of things that could be happening in that situation. So one is that, someone on one level, you kind of know, okay, I know I should be practicing. I know I should be meditating. It's like in all these books, it's on like all these podcasts these days, and it's probably good for one's health and all these whatever, but I probably should be doing it. But and you realize that, and maybe you even are inspired at times, but perhaps your mindfulness, your sati, in the sense of memory faculty, is not yet so strong that you actually remember to practice that when you should. So it's good to have different cues that are, reminding you to practice. Another thing is that, you might know what you should be doing, but just you can't. Yeah, the conditions aren't there. Your faculty of energy or your determination just isn't there yet for different reasons. I mean, I've heard Ajahn Chah and other Ajahns say, huge majority of the practice, I don't want to quote the percentages because I don't know if those were ever translated accurately. It's kind of hard to imagine Ajahn Chah talking in percentages, but the way I've heard it come down, which is something like, 90% of the practice is knowing what you should be able to do and not being able to do it. Seems like a high percentage, so it's a dubious quote, but that does exist, knowing what we should be able to do, but for whatever reasons, we just can't do it. Like, I know I should be able to not follow this thought, but the momentum of the mind, momentum, I think that's a good way to think of it. Like our habits and our actions, our proclivities and thought trains, the way we've been training our mind and thinking for so long has just been gaining up momentum for so many lives. And it's not possible just to stop it with an active will in a sustainable way, oftentimes. So that's one explanation for why that happens, why even though one might know what one should be doing, one isn't able to follow through with it. But the next question is, so what do you do with that? This is where the practice of vipassana or insight meditation comes in. You can know, even as the momentum of all these thought processes and all my old habits are rolling roughshod over the mind, there is the capacity to lift the mind up and to know that whole process. And in that sense, that is vipassana. If you are knowing clearly, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world, you're not bothered by the wheel of one's tendencies and past habit, push from the past. So you just disengage and watch the process. That's vipassana. Okay, so another quote. I am blessed to be part of a group of people inspired to live a spiritual practice. That's great. Me too. Over time, the group has been overwhelmed by people resistant to the spiritual life. Is it wise to leave or remain? Involved in a group of people that want to meditate or do other types of spiritual practice, maybe yoga. But there are other people who are maybe coming into the community who are resistant to that kind of thing. I think you really just have to know for yourself. You have to look and see how influenced you are by those people that are, disinclined towards spiritual practice. If you are able to see them and actually say, "Oh, I don't want to be like them," and take what they're doing as warnings, then it's not a problem. It can actually be a help on the path. You see them and it's like, "Oh, I better go practice because they're not doing it, and they're not doing so well." So, but if they are affecting your practice, if you are in a community and you're having to have community meetings and that's taking up large parts of your time, and you have to do a cost-benefit analysis, and there's no easy answer for this in the world. So, the Dhamma it's so beautiful on paper, and it's beautiful in the world as well. But when things manifest from the paper, from the ideas that we read into real life, things get complicated because we are humans and we are complicated. So, one question to ask is, do you have another better group of people to join, another better social arrangement to enjoy? And if not, then you have teachings, wander alone like a rhinoceros, the Rhinoceros Sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, which is probably like 30, 40, 50 verses, the final line of which is, if you can't find someone who's practicing better or on an even way as yourself, then wander alone like a rhinoceros. Wander alone like a rhinoceros. But that said, are you really going to be practicing better by yourself? One has to be realistic in looking at these things. So, and another question: are we part of a group to be supported by others, or are we there to be an example of one dedicated to the spiritual life? Good question. And you really have to, I bet it's both. It's rare. Even, the most inspiring people I've met I'll speak of monks. I've been living in monasteries for almost 15 years. They really are. They seem to be exemplars, anytime you see them. But most people, sometimes we're a good example, and we're bolstering other people up, and other times they're the ones who are bolstering us up. And I think it's usually that kind of two-way street. But you need, figure out where you're at, and that's one reflection. I think this will be their last reflection because we got to switch over to Zoom. But the trouble with wandering alone like a rhinoceros, with just practicing alone, living by yourself, not hanging out with anybody because everybody has got defilements, this type of thing, is that when you're by yourself, practicing by yourself, the highs, the spiritual highs, if you are a serious practitioner, a serious meditator, a good meditator, then the highs can be super high, but the lows can also be way lower, You can get the jhanas perhaps, but then the jhanas disappear and you're just a wreck and you go back to your addictive tendencies. Whereas if you're living in a community, you've got all these other responsibilities, so maybe the highs aren't as high. You can't necessarily get into jhana if you've got to go to the work meeting in 5 minutes. But the lows aren't as low either, because you've got friends to bolster you up. So we'll leave it at that. And it was a pleasure to discuss this beautiful sutta with everyone. And I really look forward to future Wednesday evening conversations. I think next week we'll begin going over the further the Maha Asapura Sutta, which is Majjhima Nikaya number 39. So look forward, and the topic will be right livelihood. This is another series. So hope everyone has a good evening and is able to incline their minds to wanting to see noble ones and to wanting to listen to noble ones and to want to hear what they say and to memorize what they say and to practice what you've memorized and do it for yourself and for others. So take care, everybody. Okay, good night.